All right. Well, I guess we got another story here we got to talk about that's not really directly related to college football. It's more of a legal story. Another sort of lawsuit on the outskirts of college football. You've probably heard about it over the weekend, but the University of Wisconsin is suing the University of Miami, basically for what we as fans typically refer to as tampering. We'll get into some of the details here, but this case is particularly odd for a couple of different reasons. But anyway, there was a player at Wisconsin. He's now at Miami, and Wisconsin is accusing Miami of tortious interference is exactly what they are accusing Miami of legally. Basically contract interference. Basically, again, like what we would refer to as tampering. This is from an article over on Yahoo Sports. I'm going to read through some of the article. When it comes to a lot of these legal things involving college football lately, I'm obviously not a lawyer, and sometimes I don't do a very good job of trying to explain it in sort of regular person words, I guess. So we're going to just read some of it here. Well, actually, before we read the article, let me give you just sort of my kind of take on what's going on here after having read the article myself. So Wisconsin had a player. They had already signed him to a revenue share contract. Okay, so not an NIL deal necessarily. This was a contract he signed with Wisconsin that was set to take effect basically July 1st. This all happened back in the winter. You'll see when we start to read the article here. But the player in Wisconsin had already signed a contract effective July 1st that had to do with the revenue share mess that came down last week, where the schools are now required to pay the $20 million. Apparently, after the player had signed that, but while the portal was still open, he asked Wisconsin to enter his name in the portal. He changed his mind, whatever it is. He decided he wanted to enter the portal. And I'm actually learning some stuff about the portal, too, after having gone through this article. A player doesn't enter his name in the portal. The school is the only one that can enter the player's name in the portal. And in addition, we all consider the portal, okay, you go in the portal and then you can transfer. And while that's right, the way the rules are structured, no other school can contact a player until their name is in the portal. So you really have to enter the portal if you want to be contacted the right way by other schools. In other words, you can't just put out on Twitter, hey, I want to transfer, and then other schools start contacting you, at least not by the rules. You have to be in the portal. Well, a player can't put his own name in the portal. The only person that can put a player's name in the portal is his current school, in this case, Wisconsin. So he signs a contract with Wisconsin that is set to take effect on July 1st, around the new revenue share model that is now starting July 1st. He changes his mind. He decides he wants to enter the portal. He goes to Wisconsin while the portal is open last winter and says, hey, I want to go in the portal. Wisconsin says, no, we're not putting you in the portal. You signed a contract here. You have to stay here. We're not putting you in the portal. The portal window then closes. So he's now unable to enter the portal. So what does he decide to do, the player? Well, he just drops out of class. If you've ever been in college, you've had to drop a class. He just drops out of all of his classes at Wisconsin. He goes to the registrar or whatever it is, and he unenrolls basically from Wisconsin, packs his stuff up, moves to Miami, and enrolls as just a student at the University of Miami. And then, of course, right after that, Miami puts him on an athletic scholarship, a football scholarship. So technically, he didn't transfer within the portal. He didn't go from being a football player at Wisconsin into the portal and then to Miami as a football player. He just, on his own, unenrolled from Wisconsin, separate from the Wisconsin football team or athletic department. He just unenrolled on his own, packed up, moved to Miami, enrolled in classes, and then, wow, what a miracle, Miami happens to give him a scholarship and put him on the football team. So obviously, we know you can look at that story and tell what happened. Miami was clearly in contact with him. And it was a sort of a planned thing. I mean, it's pretty obvious, right? I'm not saying Miami did anything wrong. We'll get into that, whether that was wrong for them to do that or not. But that's basically what happened here. So it's not as simple as, like, you know, some of your other like tampering cases that we've heard about, usually with high profile players, in a lot of cases quarterbacks or whatever, where, you know, a quarterback's not in the portal, but a team is contacting him, trying to get him to enter the portal. And finally he says, okay. And he enters the portal and then ends up at another team. This guy never went in the portal. He requested to go in the portal. Wisconsin said, no, you signed a contract with us effective July 1st around revenue share. You're contractually obligated to stay here. We're not putting you in the portal. Now, this is an important case because it's the first case of a school trying to enforce a contract on a player outside of just your average, everyday athletic scholarship documents that have been being signed between the player and the school for years. This is the first financial contract between a player and a school where someone is broke that contract or is being accused of breaking that contract. And really, the player isn't even really being accused. If you notice, the lawsuit is Wisconsin versus Miami, not Wisconsin versus the player. So Wisconsin's not suing the player for breaking the contract. Wisconsin is suing the school, in this case Miami, for interfering with the contract that they had with the player. So it's not. There's some nuances here. It's not straightforward where, like, Wisconsin's not suing the player for breaking the contract. They're suing Miami for interfering with the contract. The player didn't transfer to Miami because he was tampered with by Miami. He just unenrolled from Wisconsin. He never entered the portal. He asked to be put in the portal and was told no by Wisconsin. So he just unenrolled, moved to Miami and enrolled at Miami, and then boom, magically he gets put on athletic scholarship to play football at Miami. I mean, so it's not a coincidence, in other words. Like, it's pretty clear what happened here. And again, I'm not saying Miami did anything wrong. That's the point of the lawsuit. We're going to find all that out. But now let me read some of the article to you, because I probably didn't do a great job explaining that. But it says, a landmark moment in college sports. One university has filed suit against another, Wisconsin versus Miami, for poaching a college football player that they had under contract. The University of Wisconsin and its NIL collective filed a complaint in state court on Friday against the University of Miami over alleged tortious interference. So again, the lawsuit, Wisconsin is suing Miami, not the player. And they're suing Miami for tortious interference, which basically means contract interference. And I think they go on to explain that. In a first of its kind and a precedent-setting move, Wisconsin is seeking unspecified financial damages and a declaratory judgment against Miami's actions as wrongful for interfering with a binding revenue share contract between the University of Wisconsin and Xavier Lucas, that's the player's name, a former defensive back who left the program in January to compete at Miami. It was a groundbreaking decision in which Lucas transferred without ever entering the portal because it had already closed after signing the contract with Wisconsin. So again, and it doesn't mention it yet, but it's going to tell you in a second. He asked Wisconsin, according to the player, to enter the portal. Wisconsin said, no, we're not putting you in the portal. So he just unenrolls. The lawsuit details what transpired in the winter among the three parties. Now, this is according to Wisconsin. This is Wisconsin's side of the story. So we haven't heard from the player. We haven't heard from Miami, but this is Wisconsin's side of the story as laid out in their lawsuit. Wisconsin, Miami, and Lucas. All right, Wisconsin claims Miami communicated with Lucas, quote, knowingly inducing him, despite knowing he had entered a contract with the school, something it terms as intentional interference that was not justified or privileged and caused the player, Lucas, to breach, quote unquote, breach his contract. Miami interfered with Wisconsin's relationship with the student athlete by making impermissible contact with him and engaging in tampering. That's what Wisconsin is claiming. Again, by the rules, Miami cannot contact this player, Xavier Lucas, until his name is put in the portal. But Wisconsin refused to put his name in the portal because they had signed a revenue share contract with him. So let's continue. Wisconsin released a statement to Yahoo Sports on Friday saying that it reluctantly filed the suit and that it is, quote, committed to ensuring integrity and fundamental fairness in the evolving landscape of college athletics. The university is not bringing legal action against the player. And to me, that's a big part of the story. They're not suing the player here, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. This is interesting. The Big Ten Conference has come out in support of Wisconsin's lawsuit against Miami. Here's a statement from the Big Ten. We stand by our position that respecting and enforcing contractual obligations is essential to maintaining a level playing field. In addition to our legal action, we will continue to be proactive to protect the interests of our student athletes, our programs, and the broader collegiate athletics community. The case is poised to set a precedent in the ability for schools to enforce tampering clauses within revenue-sharing agreements that were contingent on the House settlement's passage. The settlement, the mechanism introducing athletic revenue sharing, was approved on June 6th. So one of the things that and again, I'm not coming from a legal perspective here. Half the time when I read these legal articles, I don't understand half of what I'm reading. But here's what's, I think, going to make this case interesting and not as black and white or cut and dry as you might necessarily think. Number one, the contract has nothing to do with NIL. So that's number one. A lot of the comments I've seen online in relationship to this article are referencing NIL. This has nothing to do with NIL at all. This is about revenue sharing between the school and the player that was just approved last week. So you're saying, well, I thought this contract was signed in the winter, December and January. Yeah. So in anticipation of this House settlement being approved, this contract was signed in December and January. Now, we didn't know 100% for certain in December or January if this House settlement was even going to get approved. Now, most people thought it was, and they turned out to be right. It was approved. But what if it wouldn't have been approved for whatever reason? Then this contract would have, I assume, been null and void, because the entire contract is based around the fact that revenue sharing was going to be permissible on July 1st, which is what ended up happening. But this contract was signed back in December, January between the player and Wisconsin. If you're the player and you've decided you want a transfer, but you've signed a contract, a revenue share contract, but you don't even know for sure if revenue share is going to be approved. In other words, I don't know if I'm necessarily blaming the player here, like you would want to do right off the bat. Oh, this player signed a contract, he's got to stay there. Well, he did sign a contract, but there was just no guarantee the House settlement was going to get approved to me, right? Now it did. Anyway, let's read some more and see what they say here. Over the last several months, dozens of schools have signed players to revenue share deals contingent on the settlement's approval. Because again, this just got approved last week, the House settlement, and it begins on July 1st. These contracts were being signed during, in Xavier Lucas's case, in December and January, just kind of fingers crossed the House settlement gets approved effective July 1st, which again it did. The suit strikes at the heart of one of the festering issues within the industry of college football: schools tampering and ultimately poaching athletes from other programs. While against NCAA rules, the enforcement of tampering has drawn little to no action from NCAA investigators who are hamstrung by court orders. Now, this is an important note, too, because it's something I've been mentioning a lot. I'm no fan of the NCAA. They have screwed a lot of things up over the course of my lifetime when it comes not just to college football, but college athletics in general. However, to place 100% of the blame of what's gone on over the last few years squarely on the NCAA, I think is unfair. The NCAA has tried to enforce a lot of things. The NCAA has tried to do a lot of things. They tried to limit transfers. They tried to put rules around NIL. They tried to limit how much you could give high school players, or whether or not you could induce high school players with NIL, basically buy high school players. They tried to do all those things. Every time they tried to enforce a rule around any of those issues, they were sued and they lost in federal court. Now, we can go back in time and say, well, the NCAA should have put stuff in place 20 years ago. They should have seen this coming. All of that is true. But, that's water under the bridge. You can't turn back the clock. You can't turn back time. So the NCAA finds itself in a spot in 2021 with NIL and freedom of transfers and all this stuff where all of that is happening. What can they do from that point forward? Well, they make rules and they start enforcing them. Well, every time they did that, they got sued and they lost. That's why players get unlimited transfers now without having to sit out and can transfer to any school they want. The 2 transfer portal windows. That's why you can give a high school player $8 million to come play football for your school, because the NCAA lost the lawsuit where they tried to regulate that. So in this case here, it's the same thing with tampering. By the time tampering became a known problem, the NCAA had lost so many lawsuits in terms of trying to restrict what a player can do. They just said, there's nothing we can do here. Yeah, you're tampering. In this case, Miami, but there's been other cases of this, other accusations made. And the NCAA has basically said, yeah, school A is tampering with school B. We have rules against it, but there's nothing we can do. We can't enforce it. Because every time we try to enforce it, the court rules against us and says the player can basically do what they want. So it's sort of easy to scapegoat the NCAA, and they've got plenty of blame in all of this mess. But they can't enforce a rule that has been federally ruled unenforceable. So their hands are tied. The NCAA, there's just nothing they can do. And that's why Wisconsin, in this case, isn't filing a complaint with the NCAA. They're not sitting around waiting on the NCAA to do some kind of investigation into this, because they know nothing will come of that. They're going straight to the court, and they're just suing, not the player for breaking his contract, but the other school, in this case, Miami, for interfering with the contract. Inside the new world of college sports, contracts stand to prevent such behavior by including specific clauses. Tortious interference describes the act of interfering with a person or entity that has signed a binding agreement. Wisconsin and Lucas struck a 2-year revenue share agreement that, like all of them, was set to begin on July 1st, the first date that schools can begin directly compensating athletes. Because of the agreement, Wisconsin refused to enter Lucas's name into the portal after he requested a transfer. This is the crux of the issue to me. This is what it boils down to. Are we going to get to a point in college football where the players are going to be held to the agreements that they make? That's what this is getting at here. This player, Xavier Lucas, signed a contract with Wisconsin, a revenue share, a 2-year revenue share contract. In other words, Wisconsin came to the player and said, hey, starting on July 1st, we can start paying the players. It doesn't mention the amounts of money, so I'm just going to make one up so we can tell the story. Wisconsin comes to the player and says, hey, we're going to give you $500,000 a year for the next 2 years through revenue share to play for Wisconsin. The player says, okay. They draw up a contract that states that. Wisconsin signs it. The player signs it. That player is now contractually obligated to Wisconsin for a period of 2 years in which he will be compensated $500,000 per year for those 2 years. Again, I'm making up the number if I have no idea what the number was. And they both willingly signed that contract. Then later, within that 2-year period, in this case, almost right after, the player goes, I want to enter the portal. Well, you signed a contract with Wisconsin, bud. So again, I think the player should have to abide by that contract. The players are making money. They're getting paid. A lot of people are comparing them now to professional athletes. If you sign a contract and agree to a certain amount of money over a certain number of years, in this case, basically a 2-year contract at whatever dollar amount per year, I think you gotta live with that. I think you gotta play that out. The only thing that sets this case aside from any cases like this in the future, to me, is that when this contract was signed, the House settlement was not official yet. It had not been finalized. So maybe in the player's mind, the player's agent's mind, or whoever, they're thinking, well, what if this House settlement doesn't get approved? Because here's what you have to remember. The players, until July 1st, any money the players make has to come through NIL. So let's say the player had an NIL deal at Wisconsin that was only paying him $100,000 a year, okay? And Miami is offering an NIL deal that will pay him $250,000 a year. And again, I don't know what the numbers are. Well, the player's going, well, I'm at Wisconsin for 100, or I can go to Miami for 250. It's a no-brainer, right? That's NIL money. Revenue share is not NIL money. The revenue share is money coming directly from the school in addition or on top of NIL money potentially. But if he signed that contract with Wisconsin, I think under normal circumstances, he should be held to that. And he should have to abide by that and stay those 2 years at Wisconsin. But the House settlement was not officially finalized when that contract was signed. So maybe in the player's mind, he's thinking, well, what if the House settlement gets delayed? What if it doesn't get approved? What if there's changes made and the schools aren't allowed to directly compensate the player? Now I'm stuck at Wisconsin for only $100,000 a year NIL money when Miami was offering me $250 NIL money. That's the only reason I'm not 100% coming down on the player here. And backing the school. And I am backing the school. I think Wisconsin should go forward with this case, if for no other reason, so we can get some sort of resolution from the courts that tell us, is this something the players can be bound to? Because I think it should be. I think that's kind of what we all want. You know, a lot of us don't like the idea of schools paying the players directly, but if there's going to be a benefit from that, that benefit is it cuts down on the number of potential transfers, right? Because if you sign a contract for 2 years, you got to stay there at least 2 years. You can't hop in and out of the portal every time the wind blows a different direction, right? Which is basically what this player did. And again, interesting to me that they did not sue the player for breaking the contract. They're going after Miami for interfering with the contract between the school and the player. Schools are walking a tightrope here with these players because you don't want to develop a reputation as a school where you're basically holding players hostage, right? You're going to come here, and if you decide to leave, we're going to sue you, the player. Like, that's a dangerous road to go down for these schools because that's something that'll be used against them in the future when it comes to recruiting, right? You know, let's say Wisconsin and Michigan are going after the same offensive lineman. Well, what do you think Michigan's going to tell that kid? You don't want to go to Wisconsin. If you're not happy there and you decide to transfer, they're going to sue you. Like, so it's a slippery slope for the schools in terms of actually trying to hold the players accountable. So in this case, Wisconsin's going after the other school that did the tampering, Miami. Very interesting case to me. I'd be curious to see how it shakes out. Let's see. A freshman last season, Lucas withdrew from classes and enrolled academically at Miami in January. So the player signs, just so we clear again on the order of events. The player signs to play football at Wisconsin. He's there. He's enrolled. He played last year. The season ends. We all know the portal window opens up basically mid-December to mid-January, right? And you have that amount of time to enter your name in the portal. During that portal window period, the player signed a revenue share contract, a 2-year revenue share contract with Wisconsin, agreeing to play for Wisconsin for the next 2 seasons for X amount of dollars per year of revenue share money, contingent on the House settlement getting approved. He signed that while the portal window was open. Shortly after that, according to Wisconsin, he was contacted by Miami and offered more money. The player then decided he didn't want to stay at Wisconsin for the whatever amount of dollars revenue share he had signed the contract for. He wanted to enter the transfer portal and transfer to Miami. So he goes to Wisconsin and he tells them, hey, I've changed my mind. I want to transfer. Enter me in the portal. Wisconsin tells him, no, we're not putting you in the portal. You signed a 2-year contract to play for the University of Wisconsin for X amount of dollars of revenue share per year over the next 2 years. We're not putting your name in the portal. Well, if his name's not in the portal, he can't legally be contacted by Miami and therefore can't legally transfer there on an academic or on an athletic scholarship to play football. So what does the player do? And I'm sure he had guidance here, whether it was from his agent or whether it was directly from somebody at Miami, but he didn't come up with this plan on his own. But the player decides, okay, you're not going to enter my name in the portal. I quit. I'm just going to unenroll. If I'm not enrolled in classes at Wisconsin, I can't play football for Wisconsin. Believe it or not, we're still, at least for now, pretending that these college football players are students as well. And in order to play any college sport, you have to be a student at that college first and foremost. So the player just goes, I'm unenrolling. I'm not going to college anymore. Basically, I quit school. And that's what he did. He dropped all of his classes and he just quit. He unenrolled from Wisconsin. And what does he do? Magically, he applies and is accepted into the University of Miami for the spring semester that was going to start in January. He packs up his stuff from Madison, Wisconsin, moves down south to Miami, enrolls in classes at Miami, and somehow the next day has an athletic scholarship to play football at the University of Miami, skirting the transfer portal altogether. That's what happened. Wisconsin then sees that and goes, well, we're suing Miami for contract interference. Not the player. We're going to sue Miami. Lucas's attorney, the player's attorney, told Yahoo Sports that he planned to file an antitrust lawsuit against Wisconsin if Lucas was unable to complete his move to Miami. He accused Wisconsin of blatantly violating NCAA rules by not inserting Lucas's name into the transfer portal as he requested, and questioned the legality of the NCAA's transfer portal in general. This gets to a bigger overall issue of college football about whether or not college football is going to be able to restrict players' ability to transfer to certain periods of time that we refer to now as transfer portal windows, right? You got the December, January window, and then you've got the post-spring practice window that occurs the end of April, beginning of May. This attorney is suggesting that no one in college football has the right to restrict the timeline as far as when players can transfer. Obviously, there has to be windows and timelines for when a player can transfer, but that's a different topic for a different day. The revenue share agreement, a Big Ten issued template form, binds Lucas and all players who sign it to that specific school and grants that school a player's non-exclusive rights to use and market their name, image, and likeness. The agreement prohibits the player's rights to be used by any other school while permitting him or her to sign outside marketing agreements according to those familiar with the template. So basically what they're saying there is the way the revenue share contracts are drawn up between the school and the player going forward. And again, you have to keep revenue share separated in your mind from NIL. They're two totally and separate different things, okay? Revenue share is money paid to the player directly from the school, basically just because you play a sport at that school. NIL is marketing deals that you get outside of the school. So you're in a Wendy's commercial. You're in a car dealership commercial, right? You're paid $100,000 to make social media posts for whatever company. That's NIL. Revenue share is money paid directly from the school. And what this is saying here is that these contracts that the schools are drawing up, when you sign them, it says it right here. You are granting a school exclusive rights to use and market the name, image, and likeness. The agreement prohibits the player's rights to be used by any other school while permitting him to sign outside marketing agreements with that school. So, in other words, we're going to give you this amount of money in revenue share, and then you can make additional money outside of that while you play here through name, image, and likeness on your own or through your agent or whatever it is. And during the length of your contract, you can't go to another school. You can't be paid by another school. You can't market for another school. So that's sort of the crux of the legal issue there. Lucas signed an NIL agreement with the collective to compensate him until the university could legally, within settlement terms, compensate him with revenue starting in July. So he had an NIL deal basically that ran through the end of June. And then his revenue share started on July 1st with Wisconsin. And again, that's the contract he signed, the revenue share contract. Anyway, what do y'all make of this? What do you think? Are you on a team here? Are you team Wisconsin? Are you team Miami? Are you team just players' rights? No matter what, they should be able to do and go and play for whoever they want and make whatever money they want, when they want, should be able to transfer anytime. There should be no restriction period at all, ever, no matter what. I'm on Wisconsin's side here generally. I think going forward with revenue share, if you as a player sign a contract to make X amount of dollars for X amount of years from whatever school, and you sign that contract, I think you should be contractually obligated to stay there for that amount of time. The only hesitation I have with this particular case is that this contract was signed before we knew for sure that revenue share was going to take place and kick in. So there is a possibility that this player could have agreed and signed this revenue share deal, and then the revenue share never got approved and he was stuck at Wisconsin anyway. So that's the only sort of caveat I have to how I feel about this particular story. But in general, as far as how I feel going forward, when the school's directly paying the players, you want to sign a 1-year contract, sign a 1-year contract. But if you sign a 2-year contract or a 4-year contract, you're now obligated for that 2 years or that 4 years. That's how I feel it should be. You're getting paid directly from the school. It's no different than an NFL player signing a 2-year contract with the Falcons. Okay, after the first year, you might hate the Falcons. You can't just leave. You can't sign a 2-year contract with the Falcons, agree to get paid X amount of dollars for the next 2 years, and then after 1 week or 1 year go, I changed my mind, I'm going to play for the Eagles. You just can't do that. And I think college football has got to have those same set of rules and standards. And if that means players only sign a 1-year contract, then only sign a 1-year contract. And then you'll have that freedom after 1 year to sort of look around if you want to go somewhere else. But in this case, this player signed a 2-year deal. I feel like he probably should have stayed at Wisconsin for the 2 years. Anyway, let me know down below what you think. Appreciate you watching. Have a good morning.